Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. 3 totally different histories of America. We're talking about the same piece of land, but the stories, they're worlds apart. I mean, we all think we know the answer to this one, don't we? It's what we learned in school. But it turns out, that's just one version of the story. And honestly, the real picture is way more complicated and way more controversial than you probably think. Yeah, it's not just a simple disagreement. The story of America's origins is a full-on battleground. You've got competing histories, narratives that have been buried for centuries, and evidence that points in completely different directions. And today, we're going to try to make sense of it all. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start by looking at these multiple histories. Then we'll see what they say about America before Columbus and dive into the contested narratives of slavery. We'll also get into the evidence, what some call a paper genocide versus the historical record. And we'll wrap up with why this all still matters so much today. All right, Section 1, One Land, Multiple Histories. So to really get a handle on this, we're looking at 3 totally distinct sources, each painting a really different picture of the same place. So on one side, you have the story most of us know, the Columbian Exchange, right? 2 worlds colliding. But then you have these 2 other really powerful narratives. One claims there was an entire indigenous Black civilization that got erased from the history books. And the other tells the amazing story of the Black Seminoles, a tribe of Black Indians who literally fought their own way to freedom. Okay, let's jump in. America before Columbus, a tale of 2 civilizations. So let's rewind the clock all the way back. What did this continent actually look like in 1491? So, the mainstream view? You gotta throw out that whole idea of an empty wilderness. In 1491, the Americas were buzzing with people, maybe up to 100 million. We're talking about massive civilizations, sophisticated farming. I mean, these people took a tiny wild grass and turned it into corn. The landscape wasn't wild, it was actively managed. But here's where things get really interesting. A totally different narrative says that those great ancient civilizations, they were built by indigenous Black people. The claim is that the Americas have more pyramids than the rest of the world combined, and that the oldest ones are right here, not in Africa. It's a pretty mind-blowing idea. And the folks who support this idea, they point to evidence from the colonizers themselves. Take a look at this early European art. It often showed America, the continent personified, as a figure with dark skin, feathers, and a bow. The argument is, hey, this is a visual record of who they actually met when they first got here. All right, next up, slavery, the contested narratives. This is where those competing histories really start to clash. We're talking about one of the most contentious topics in American history, and the stories could not be more different. Okay, so the story we usually hear focuses on the transatlantic slave trade. It's a massive, brutal story. The idea is that after European diseases wiped out huge numbers of Native Americans, the colonies needed labor for their plantations. Sugar, tobacco, you name it. So they forcibly brought about 10 million Africans across the ocean to do that work, fueling the whole economy of the New World. But here's the challenge to that narrative. It comes down to the numbers. The claim is that if you look at the data, and this includes figures cited by well-known scholars, less than 4% of all enslaved Africans who came to the Americas were actually brought to what is now the United States. And that brings up a really tough question. We know the life expectancy for a plantation slave was horrifically short, somewhere between 21 and 31 years. So could a starting population of just under 400,000 people really grow to 45 million descendants? This counter-narrative says the math just doesn't work, and it suggests that a large Black population must have already been here. Which leads us to this third incredible story, the Black Seminoles. Now, this isn't about origins or being reclassified on paper. This is a story of action, of self-liberation. You had enslaved Africans escaping to Spanish Florida, teaming up with Seminole tribes, and forming their own communities. They fought the U.S. Army so fiercely that one general even called it a Negro War, not an Indian War. And get this, after being forcibly removed to Oklahoma, they literally walked to Mexico to finally secure their freedom for good. Okay, so how on earth can these stories be so different? Well, it all boils down to what you consider to be evidence, and just as importantly, how you read that evidence. So, a key idea in that counter-narrative is something called paper genocide. The argument is that an entire people's identity was systematically erased not with weapons, but with documents. That indigenous Black Americans were reclassified on census records and land deeds as Negro, mulatto, colored, to strip them of their heritage and their claim to the land. And check this out. This is the kind of evidence proponents point to. These are real runaway slave ads from the 1770s. Look at the descriptions. A Negro girl with long Indian hair. Or this one, a mulatto servant man, an Indian by birth. For supporters of this theory, this is an interpretation. This is direct proof, right there in black and white, of that reclassification happening. Now, on the other side, mainstream history uses a completely different toolkit. We're talking hard science, like dendrochronology, that's counting tree rings to date things, or even analyzing ancient solidified pack rat nests, seriously, to reconstruct what the environment was like thousands of years ago. Plus, there's archaeology and poring over massive archives like colonial shipping manifests to track the movement of people and goods. So let's get to the heart of it, the unfinished story, why this matters. Because, this isn't just some dusty academic argument. This is a battle over identity, over heritage, and really over the story America tells about itself. And this really gets to the core of the whole thing. We're left with two fundamentally different ideas of what history is. Is it a science, something where you analyze physical evidence and data to arrive at one objective truth? Or is history a story written by the winners, a tool of power that has to be challenged by digging up the documents and traditions that were deliberately buried? And you can see just how personal and painful this gets. This quote really lays it bare. There's this feeling of being programmed for generations, where if someone tries to connect with their indigenous roots, they're told by others in their own community, no, you're just ashamed to be African. It creates this incredibly difficult internal conflict. So that leaves us with this final, really big question. When history itself is this contested, how do we decide which stories to tell? We're not just looking at competing facts here. We're looking at completely different ways of understanding the past. So the real question isn't just what happened. It's how do we know what happened? And maybe more importantly, whose stories do we choose to believe when the narratives themselves are at war?